I was just making some copies.
We knew you were going to make it.
All right, well, it's after 7. I've got some copies made. They're in the back. Although if you raise your hand, I bet someone would be along to pass one out to you. Got one up here and one down here. And if we run out, there might be some more on the printer. I got tired of waiting. I knew everyone was waiting on me, and I was waiting on the copier, so here we are. We'll get rocking and rolling here in just a second. Get some of these passed out and passed out. Well, I'm hoping not to pass out tonight. Still need a couple of copies down here in front. I think maybe Kerry is, but he's passing them out back there first. How many copies do we have left? Just one? Oh, we're going to need more copies than that. Okay. While Carrie's doing that, I will go ahead and get started here with a prayer. Dear God, we thank you for tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to come and to learn about you, Lord, and to worship you. Lord, we pray that you bless this lesson, that it might be useful to us. And we thank you for your creation, Lord. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray. Amen. Okay, so this week, into apologetics again. This is the 4th lesson, and this is Does God Exist? Part 3. All right, the first 2 lessons of Does God Exist? Kevin, I think I'm a little hot. I'm picking up just a little bit of feedback. Thank you. So the first 2 lessons. The first lesson was design demands a designer. That you can't see a clock, a fancy watch, and to see all the little pieces working together and just pretend like it just came to be, that it just was, all these little pieces intricate and working together. You wouldn't expect that. Last week's lesson was the moral argument, that we have morals, and where do we get them? Because animals have no morals, right? It's like an hour and a half worth of lessons summed up in a minute. And so here's today's lesson. It is the cause and effect lesson, also the cosmological argument. That's what it's been called for a really, really long time. And in my opinion, it's one of the strongest arguments. And it also ties in really well with the teleological argument that design demands a designer. So, we start out in the header I here, that nothing just happens without someone or something causing it to happen. A tree doesn't fall without some cause to make it fall. Someone might have cut it down. Termites or some other pest may have got after it and killed it. An ice storm or some other natural disaster could be to blame for the fall of the tree. And we know that houses don't just appear, that it takes planning and actual building to produce a house. And if it's good or not, it doesn't really matter that someone had to build it, because it didn't just show up. Growth doesn't happen without some outside influence. You can plant a seed. Well, let's say this. You can have a seed, but if you don't plant it in the ground, it will stay a seed. And in fact, I can tell you, if you just plant a seed in the ground, it's not guaranteed to come up. A lot of seeds need a dormancy period, and if you don't know how to trick them into thinking they've been outside for a winter, they're not going to grow. They're just going to be a dead seed and rot in the ground. And if you plant your seed in the desert, if it's not a plant that grows in the desert, it's not going to grow. If you try and plant a strawberry plant out on the beach, on some sandy beach by the sea, it's not going to work. It's not going to take root. It's got no nutrients. The salt water is probably going to kill it. So you can't just... I lost my train of thought going on about how trees grow and the seeds grow. that growth doesn't just happen. And that's where we're at. Right? You've got to plant the seed. You need good soil. You need water. You need sunlight. These things just don't happen. Seeds don't just grow. And also people don't grow without nutrition being provided for them. And clouds won't grow without evaporation. And all that is to say is that something cannot come from nothing. Right? Cause and effect argument. The reason we have a tree is because there was a seed in the ground, and the seed was ready to grow. The ground was good for it to grow. There was water that fell on it, and sunshine to encourage that growth upwards and to give energy to the plant. Cause and effect. You all didn't just happen to be here. You came in a car, or a van, or a truck, or whatever, or maybe you walked. But you didn't just show up on your own. Something brought you here. And for all this, right, some of these steps that I was talking about, like the seed and everything it needs to grow, I think it ties in very well to the design, needing a designer. And we're going to get into it a little bit later, a little bit more into that. And for this section 2, I want you to consider whatever law of motion that it is, that for every action, you get an equal and opposite reaction. Right? If I push on this podium, the podium's doing a little bit of pushing back. It's not got a lot to it. It's not heavy, and all it's got for it is gravity holding it where it's at. But I can beat that. Right? I can throw a pin. The pin's not going to do much against me. But if I try and push the earth, well, the earth has a little bit of a better hold on me. So I can't really do anything about that. Which leads us to letter A here in section 2. That every effect, and we'll call that a thing that happens or exists, must have an adequate cause. And that means that the cause must be something that could make the effect happen. Again, to send this pin off into the air, I need to be able to throw that pin. So, we've got some simpler terms here in the lesson. That a tree won't fall because a baby coughs. It's not an adequate cause. But if you crash an airplane into a tree, that's big enough to cause the tree to fall. And no effect can be greater or superior to what caused it. That is to say that the earth could not be created by someone or something smaller and inferior to the earth. A newborn puppy is not larger than the mama dog that gave birth to it. It takes something bigger to move something smaller along. And we're moving in here. It's in the same chunk of lesson, but I personally think this is a slightly different topic here. And it's that everything is winding down. It's one of the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah, things don't go to a higher order. They're always...
Right. Things are always in a decline. They don't move to a higher order. Imagine ovening, putting something in the oven and cooking it for an hour. You leave it on the counter, after 15 minutes, it's already cooled off quite a bit. All right, if you've ever baked a cake or anything, you know that's the case. You've got to let it cool. Brett?
Part of the second law of thermodynamics is that items in the universe, they naturally achieve their what's called the lowest energy state. That means they do not simultaneously get up and, anything sitting on a desk does not naturally get up and start jumping around. It stays where it is, it stays at the lowest energy state, and until a force or a piece of energy interacts with it, it will stay at rest.
All right, for those of you who couldn't hear Brett, I had my face way too close to that microphone. He was saying that things in the universe naturally want to be in their low energy state. Lowest energy state, which means that my notebook on this podium is not going to suddenly jump to a higher energy state and start moving around on its own, because that's not how it works. So we've got everything winding down, everything slowing down, everything getting colder, right? Don't worry, it's on a universal scale, it's not happening right now. We've got some time. There's a little bit of doom and gloom there. We have some examples that we can look around and see that things are tending towards being slower and breaking down and becoming colder. We've got our bodies that wear down over time. We've got, after a certain distance, light fading out. You can see the lights of Kokomo for a long ways. But once you get out too much farther past the moon, you're not really seeing a whole lot of lights. You're going to see, actually, I don't know how far distant. Don't hold me to that. This is apologetics class. We got to back up stuff. We can't just say stuff. Consider the stars, right? Some of the stars you see at night, they're not actually stars. They're galaxies. They're whole galaxies with each hundreds of thousands of stars, and each star has its own set of planets. But you don't see it because it's not bright enough, right? Consider even being in town and looking at the stars. You just don't see as many as compared to, our star. Our star isn't even that big, I don't think, by comparison. It's pretty small.
There's one star that's much larger.
Oh, we've got humongous stars, like forget the numbers. You wouldn't even get it. It's huge. All I know is it's way bigger than I can understand because the sun is already huge. But you have a candle, right? Let's take a little closer example. You take a candle, and you can see it for a little while in the dark. But you go out a mile, you're not going to be able to see that candle so well. Things are wearing down. Consider your cars. If you have a good car, it might last 20 years, it might last 30 years, but it all wears down. When you have a fire, the material in the log becomes less and less as the energy is used up in making and sustaining the fire. And so if everything is winding down, there must have been some beginning for it. Right, again, cause and effect. If you go backwards, there's no infinite winding up, and that gets into a little bit of the counter-argument for this, right? Because for every apologetics lesson, there is a counter-argument for it, because that's just apologetics. Right? If we say because everything is winding down, if every effect means there was a cause for it, we're going to get into this in probably like 10 minutes. But you go back far enough, and there's really two options. One, something started it all off. Or two, it's always been going. And there's some fancy philosophical talk for it. But the idea is anything that happens could have not happened. Maybe. I watched like a 10-minute video on it a couple nights ago. But in a state of uncertainty, how far could you go back before something could have been or could not have been? And you go back forever and you find that nothing is there, maybe. Because what caused that? You just go back forever, and it's not a strong argument. It's really not. That's why I think this is one of the stronger arguments in apologetics for the existence of God. But again, we'll move more into the arguments here and counter-arguments in a little bit. So here we are, back in C3, talking about if we go backwards, that there's no infinite winding up that exists. And that if matter were eternal, it wouldn't wind down. But it is winding down, and we see it. And the fact that it is winding down shows that it had a beginning. And this is true of all matter and energy that you see. Right? Even science has predicted the heat death of the universe, where eventually everything, if you leave it go as it is, it just cools down and there's nothing, and things just stop moving because heat winds down. And if it was always before, then you would assume it would always be after. That's how infinity works. But if it's winding down to nothing, like we said, it's not a super strong argument there. And then also in letter E, I like this argument a lot too, that there is no spontaneous generation, which means that life comes from life. I forget how many years ago. This is a good number of years. But the prevailing idea was that maggots, baby flies, were born of dead meat. That if you had some meat and you set it out, it would magically grow maggots and flies, which is useful to know if you want to have some maggots around. For medicinal purposes. Yeah, one of the creepy facts is that they're still using maggots sometimes in medicine to eat away the dead flesh from an infection. So, as fancy as science is, we're still having little fly babies to eat dead flesh on us. Ugh. Anyways, there's also the idea that mice were just born out of hay piles. That's not how it works. And we know that's not how it works. Little baby mice come from adult mice that used to be little baby mice that came from other adult mice. The way they prove this is called abiogenesis. It means not life starting. All right? A is no, bio is life, genesis is the start. It means life doesn't just happen. They put a piece of meat in a jar and wrapped a cloth over it and said, if there's flies in the jar, then flies come from dead meat. But there weren't. They found maggots on top of the cloth, on top of the jar, but no meat, no flies in the meat, no maggots being born from the meat. And if you run that back, right, the start of life in the universe, what started that? Right? Science might try and tell you that salt water had a good year that year, but if there's not life, then there's not going to be life that comes from it. Right? If you have a bunch of rocks and water, you're going to have a bunch of rocks and water. Which again is one of my favorite arguments for the existence of God, that life doesn't just, it's not just a thing. What started the living? Not rocks and water. So we're looking at, yes. Right, and we're going to get a little bit into it. The Big Bang Theory is, I mean, it's interesting, but we have been talking about cause and effect, and if everything exploded, what pushed it out, right? If before there was everything, there was nothing, what made that nothing do anything? Because nothing does nothing. And we've been talking about that even the things that are, the things that do move, they're not working on growing more. They're not working on generating more heat. All right, even the stars up in the sky that generate an enormous amount of energy, they're going to generate that energy and then they shut down. They run out of materials. And scientists say, and it's really pretty cool, this life and death of a star, that it winds down, right? It might expand for a little bit, and then it draws in and then explodes. But like I mentioned earlier, there's a heat death of the universe. After everything is grown and exploded and condensed, and it slows down and it stops. It burns up.
Alex, have you heard anything from the thought that the universe is expanding? Or is that because man is finding ways to look further into the universe? Is it really expanding? Or we're finding new planets, etc. But is that because of our ability to see better and look further?
All right, so the question is, have I heard anything about the universe being in a constant state of expansion on account of we're always discovering new planets and things? I believe we're supposed to be so far away. Kevin, you got?
Yeah, it is. Because the farther you look, the farther you
Oh,
look, you go away from us faster and faster.
the farther you look, things are moving away from us faster and faster. So the idea is, yes, it's expanding.
Now, see, that's contrary, though, to everything winding down, because the universe is winding up.
But it's spreading out.
Right. It's not necessarily that it's contrary to the universe winding down because it looks like it's expanding. If to go along with this Big Bang, when you throw something away, right, you get some pretty good acceleration from the start of it. And it starts maybe slower at first, and as more force is pushing it away, it'll push it away faster. I think definitely that it will slow down because we know things slow down. And also it's supposed to be expanding faster. Is it supposed to be expanding faster than the speed of light? No, maybe not that fast. Universal speed limit, you don't break that rule. But it's expanding faster than what we're able to see on the edge of it. And to think about there being an edge of space, it's mind-boggling. And we're going to get into some more mind-boggling things later, too.
Does that mean, like, I know the Earth is slowing down. So obviously at one point it's getting faster. I assume the orbits and whatnot are following the same dynamics that would. So as those things do slow down, they greater distance between.
Right. The question is if we are slowing down, and we are, the Earth isn't spinning as fast as it used to, but we're not talking like a whole lot of time here. A second a year. And we're spinning pretty fast. That maybe as we slow down, that things might look like they're faster. And I think that's a possibility. And I don't know. There's a lot of big things out there, and I'm not quite at that point in my level of education to speak definitively on these things.
It seems like it makes sense. I mean, the gravitational pull would be greater than the actual thing. And as things slow down, relax.
Yeah, I'm gonna chalk that up to way bigger than me. We're talking distance on a size you wouldn't believe. It's I don't remember how many light years away the next closest star is, but that's the amount of years it would take you to move if you were moving at the speed of light, which is insane to get there. Bob?
4.5 light years.
It's 4.5 light years? Yeah, 4.5 light years. So if you were somehow able to manage to get up to the speed of light, which again is crazy, it would take you 4.5 years to get to the next nearest star. Right? And I told you about some of those stars you see in the sky. They're not individual stars. You'll find two stars that are actually really close together, but your eye isn't sharp enough to pick out the difference in the two. You'll find that some of those stars that you're looking at, again, are galaxies full of hundreds of thousands of stars. Right? If you ever want to know how big the universe is, just find out how far. What is it, like 100,000 light years or something across? Is the Milky Way galaxy, which is just one galaxy. And I mean, it's crazy. 100,000 years.
And it's not the largest.
And it's not the largest. Right? Just the sizes will boggle your mind. So we're going to step back from that. We're just gonna ease up there.
How things are
Right. The question then is, how big is our God? And I think we'll touch on that here in a minute. Good. So we're in 3 now, in Roman numeral 3. And we're suggesting that the application of these laws prove that God exists. I'll throw in a counter-argument here. One of the biggest counter-arguments is that maybe there was a God, but this doesn't prove that it's the Christian God, which is fair, right? It's a fair thing to say that maybe there is something bigger, what you would call a God, but it doesn't mean that it's the Christian God. It doesn't mean it's the Judeo-Christian God. So just be aware of that counter-argument. We could say that if there is a God, spent all this time setting things in motion, such as he did, that he would probably care to be known by the people that he made in his image. But that's another can of worms. We're going to put it on the shelf. So here we are. We've got material is not eternal, and thus it had a beginning. Now, evolutionists like to claim that the Big Bang was the beginning of everything. They do not, however, have an answer as to where the materials that caused this supposed Big Bang came from. Right? I've heard the Big Bang theory another way is that God snapped his fingers and bang, there it was. That's the Big Bang right there. So,
Must have created something to blow up, though.
right. So, the only explanation that really works, that can explain the existence of matter, is that it was created. We've got in B here that the universe exists, and so it had to have been created. The universe is the effect, and it can't be bigger or greater than whatever caused it. God is the answer there. Right? God being bigger than even all the matter in the universe, all the things, right? It's for a size comparison. The earth is huge. The earth is huge. But compared to the sun is a grapefruit compared to the earth being the ball tip on a ballpoint pen. That's a size comparison for the earth to the sun. The earth is, and like we mentioned earlier, the sun is not even close to the biggest star. The comparison, it's not even funny. There's so much in the universe.
Alex, we also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Walt. Go ahead.
Walt.
Well, we got to think about what we mean by bigger. For example, man made the atom bomb. Well, that explosion is much bigger than man. Man can overcome all the animals, and yet many of the animals are bigger than man. So when we say bigger, we're talking about intellect, power.
All right, not necessarily a size bigger when we're talking about bigger.
We're not talking dimensional. We're talking about
Something more powerful.
yes.
True. Brett.
Yeah, the creation of the universe or the Big Bang theory, putting that aside, the laws of science now, principally in physics, operate under the 2 laws of conservation of matter and conservation of energy. And occasionally those 2 interact, where energy is used, or where actually matter is used to create energy, and sometimes energy is used to create matter. But the entire balance between matter and energy remains a zero-sum game in any extent. And that's the laws of science or physics that we currently operate under today.
Right. So for those of you who couldn't hear, we're looking at particularly two laws that govern physics. It's the law of the conservation of mass and the law of the conservation of energy. And sometimes they kind of mix a little bit, where you can use energy to create mass or mass to create energy. Oh, that primary recency effect, I'll tell you what. That's where you can remember the things at the start and the things at the end, but the middle just goes completely fuzzy. So help me remember what you were. We had that was it?
That was it.
Okay, so.
There was discovery of the periodic table that helped us to organize what matter is, what the elements are, based on their protons, neutrons, and electrons.
Right.
Helped us understand the physical nature of matter.
Okay, so that comes from understanding the physical nature of matter better, the elements and what they're made of, the neutrons and electrons and protons, which are things smaller than you'll ever be able to see without an electron microscope. And these protons and neutrons and electrons are made up of things that are only guessed.
Well, they're the building blocks that create everything.
Right, but you have the gluons, the quarks. I don't know. I don't even know. But you can look it up if you're interested. Those are even smaller, right?
Those are atomic particles that are as small to electrons, protons, and neutrons as electrons, protons, and neutrons are to us.
Right. So in case you didn't hear that, the things I mentioned are as small to electrons and protons and neutrons as electrons, protons, and neutrons are small to us. And
We're talking about how big the universe is, and we're always finding more and more as we get more, better telescopes to reach out and whatnot. And it's infinite, it just keeps on going. Yet at the same time, we're looking out there, and we can't fathom that this just continuously keeps going, and keep finding these things. The smaller we get and keep looking at, we find how complex these little things even are. That boggle the mind. We wouldn't give it a second thought, probably prior to these, neutron microscopes like you're talking about.
right. For those of you who couldn't hear, Gary was talking about just the amazing vastness. The smaller we look at things, the smaller we go down, the more powerful the microscope, thank you. My goodness, I don't take a nap after this, I guess. So the bigger you have the microscopes, the smaller things you can see, and we're finding that it goes down amazingly small. And then we look out to the stars with our telescopes, and we find things that are going farther than we could ever imagine going. We'll never get to the edge of the universe. So let's go ahead and move on to section D here. This is what sometime, Roman numeral 3, section D. This argument is sometimes called the argument of the unmoved mover. And this lesson puts it out as the prime mover. And we mentioned it a little bit ago about how everything being caused, and it could either have been caused or not caused, based on something that came before it. And eventually you have to find the original cause, which is what we're saying God is, that God is the unmoved mover, that he was the one that put things into existence. And this is where it gets a little crazy for me. If we're suggesting that God made everything in the universe, then God is outside of that universe, which is really, really hard to understand. Right? I can talk about it because we have some ideas to talk about it, but I have no actual concept. I can't actually put it into my mind what it would be like to not be bound by the laws of time and space. That 5 minutes ago is 5 minutes ago, and I'll never be able to get to that again because it's past. It's happened. And we've gone past it now. And the laws of space, of matter. We've been talking about that a lot tonight, of things wearing down. I'm never going to be 20 again, or whatever my peak age was. I'm never going to be there again. That I'm wearing down. I'm not saying I'm wearing down fast or anything. I'm just saying that I'm wearing down too. I know I don't have as much claim to say that as some people, but everything's wearing down.
I'm wearing down faster.
I wasn't going to name names. Right, I'm not naming any names. But you know that people age, things break down. That's how it works. We're bound by these rules. But God is outside of these rules. God made the universe, but he's not bound by the rules. There was a question I heard once, is that if God is so powerful, can he make a rock so big that he can't even move it? Which is silly if you consider that God is outside of time and space and he's not bound by the laws of time and space. And again, trying to understand that I can't. All I know is that we're in a fishbowl, maybe. We're in a fish tank, maybe, and we understand what's in the fish tank. We don't understand where the water came from. We don't know who poured it in there. We don't understand the glass walls we're in. We can't possibly understand because we're in this fish tank of time and space. Our minds are a little bit limited. I don't know, maybe think of it as some other level or plane of existence, but it's so big. When I start thinking about things like that, I say, nope, I'm going to go sit down and watch some TV and not think about that, because it's just not something I can understand. Or you can try and understand pieces of it, but God is big, more powerful, and bigger, if bigger is even the right word, because again, God's not limited by the rules of time and space.
Eternal, therefore, time is nothing to him.
Right.
And we have a song we sing, when time is no more, meaning it will be in that particular element.
Right.
Time is will not be.
Right. Kevin.
That's why the Bible is mostly God is described, not described in concrete terms. It's more his life that he has with that. Some call poetical, because there is no way to concretely define God, creation terms.
Right. For those of you who couldn't hear Kevin, that the Bible doesn't try and describe God in concrete terms. It says he has characteristics like this or like that. But And he's not like, even when Moses asked about it, like, who do I say sent me? I am, right? And to me, that expresses a certain level of existence that God is there, was, is, and will be, right? We even hear it in Revelation, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, everything. And that's really the lesson, the unmoved mover. That because things are moving, someone had to set it in motion. And again, I think it lines up really well with the design, demands a designer element. Because not only was it set in motion, but it was set in motion in such a way that it all works together. And when you think about chaos, and it tends toward self-destruction, right? Brett was saying earlier that things are in their lowest energy state. Nothing more comes from it. You have to start it moving. And with that, we finished mostly on time.
Good evening. Thank you, Alex. I especially like the discussion on, I think it was Brett that mentioned this law. Items naturally reach their lowest energy state until acted upon by an outside force. Sunday night we feel that way until the alarm goes off on Monday morning, and that's the outside force that gets you going again. So I also thought I really like practicing the law of conservation of energy. So I say those apologetically. That was for Mark. That was for Mark, Katie. I do want to read Romans 1:20. During those discussions, we need to keep in mind that what a wonderful universe and world that God has created. And all those things that we've talked about, we're remembering just how magnificent God is. Romans 1 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." We mentioned a lot of different laws, Einstein's laws, Newton's laws, Ohm's laws, Kepler's laws, Kirchhoff's laws. I just looked up some of the different laws. Those are just people that identified what God has created. So, announcements tonight. Kim McNeil would like to surprise her mother, Barb Edwards, with a birthday card shower to commemorate her 90th birthday on May 19th. Please send cards in care of Kim to their address. It's in the window, or also you can bring them in and give them to her here. So The address is 1601 Braymore Drive, Bramoor Drive, Kokomo, Indiana 46902. We want to continue to remember Pat Hassler in our prayers as she's at home recovering with orders from the doctor to rest and live a stress-free life, if that's possible. We want to keep Vito Ligorio and his congregation in our prayers as they're on lockdown. We want to celebrate that the mill spas are back with us again and doing better. And I have another announcement. Larry Page was in the hospital yesterday. He's at home now, but he's on, I think as John said, a boatload of antibiotics. So he's on a lot of antibiotics. So keep him in your prayers. Is there any other announcements I haven't made? Brett, do you have closing prayer?
Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for this opportunity to learn about the wonderful universe that you've created for us to be your people. We learn, I guess it's not quite so important to us that we know how you created the universe from nothing, how you divided the firmament in heaven, and all of those things. We're trying little by little to understand the universe, understand the nature of what you have created for us and for all mankind. And help us to do that. Dear Lord, in our country, we also ask for your guidance for those not just here but around the world that are suffering from COVID, and we would ask that you would help those people, help those governments cope with this pandemic. We ask particularly in India and in Italy and other places that are having an outbreak that you would be with them, with their government, with their healthcare providers, that they may be able to overcome this. And dear Lord, in our country, we hear many, many calls for unity by many people, and unfortunately, unity appears to be come join my side and you'll be united with me. I guess really we want is to be united with you, Lord, and be your people, be examples to others in our community, sacrifice our time and our money and our efforts towards you and towards your kingdom. And we would ask that you would be with us this day and every day. Help us to continually read our Bible, to pray for you, to help others in not only in our families, but in our communities. Help us to be good citizens, and we ask all these things in your Son's name, Jesus. Amen.